Hi guys, welcome to another Monday night study. We're continuing to go through the Ezra Apocalypse. We're going to look at starting tonight, we're going to look at the last two chapters, 15 and 16. And it's really interesting because it's got some things dealing with the past up to today and then the future. So we've got the 10 nations appearing, we've got the dragon nations appearing, which is the rise of Islam, and the things that they do toward the end, and the things that God does. So I think it'll be really interesting. So we'll probably have two more studies after this based on those two chapters. So we'll get into it now. So if we go to the Ezra Apocalypse, chapter 15, basically we had, if I show you here, we looked at the end time signs of 9, and then the three-headed eagle, the Messiah from the sea, and then the sacred books. So there was a picture of the Messiah and the Battle of Armageddon. The sacred books were how the canon was closed, and the extra books. So the fact that we have a public canon, that's our Old Testament, just like what we have. And then there are at least 70 or more extra books that were kept by the school of the prophets that are not in the canon. So very important for us to know that. And we said that's the reason why the Anglicans, when they put together the King James 1611, made sure to remove the Apocrypha from the Old Testament, put it in the center, because it shouldn't be there. It shouldn't be in the Old Testament or the New Testament, either one. Good to read, but it's not part of the canons per se. And so we have that, and they include the Ezra Apocalypse in the King James 1611 for that reason, just to show that's their authority for doing so. So anyway, we got that. So let's go into chapter 15, which is the last day's prophecy. Now, this is interesting. Let's just go ahead and start here. Behold, teach the words of prophecy, which I will reveal to you, to my people, says the Lord. Write them on paper, for they are faithful and true. Do not fear the imaginations of unbelievers, and do not be troubled by those who speak against you, for all the unfaithful will die in their unfaithfulness. Today we have the same kind of stuff. When you talk about prophecy in general, a lot of people look at you like you're crazy because they don't believe. I've had several people that I've talked to. It's like, are you a believer? Yes. But you just said you didn't believe in prophecy. No, we don't. How can you believe half the Bible? Well, we just think it was all fulfilled. Well, that's okay. In other words, there was real prophecy and it was fulfilled. So prophecy is a thing, and then you get the look like, I'm not sure how that works. But we've seen in Enoch and several other places the whole idea of despising prophecies. Paul in I think it's 1 Thessalonians 5, in the list of things that you should do as brothers. One of them is don't despise the prophecies or set them at naught, set them away. So that's a command. And to set aside the prophecies, almost everybody agrees that the prophecies about Jesus being born and dying, and those were all literal. They were fulfilled. So that's part of them. Those things wouldn't be argued. But the other prophecies for the second coming, those are the ones that they argue about or just set aside completely. I've heard people say, well, whenever the Lord comes back, he'll sort it all out. We don't need to worry about it. Well, but that's not what the command is. If I was to say I get drunk and fornicate, and maybe it's a sin and maybe it's not, when the Lord comes back, he'll let us know. I think I would be punished for doing that. It's too specific, and so prophecy is the same thing. The Lord will come back, certain things will happen, and those are things we need to look at. So don't fear the unbelievers, because they will continue to be unbelievers. Some of them will. Other people, remember, other people might make fun of you, but they'll wonder. And the more you and other people talk about it, they'll eventually say, well, maybe I should look into this subject. And maybe they might become believers because of that. Before someone converts, They're usually very hostile. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to deal with it. I think it's stupid. Leave me alone, because they're scared. So we got to remember that. So we don't fear them. And he's supposed to write this down on paper. And he did. So the unfaithful, if they remain unfaithful or unbelievers, then they'll die in their unfaithfulness. So last days morality. Some We're going through the signs of the, like it says here, the last days, the signs. And we've had 3 sections already about last days signs. So it's important to kind of pull them together. So he's starting over, but he's going to get very, very specific in certain prophecies. So we want to catch up to today. So first off, it says, "Behold, says the Lord, I will bring plagues upon the world." Now, a plague, it could be a disease, it could also be a plague of locusts, something like that. So if a group of insects like locusts or some sort of bacteria or something, whatever, eats up or destroys the food or the crops, maybe it doesn't hurt humans or animals at all, but it destroys food, that would still be a plague. So some sort of disease that kills people, some sort of thing or insects or something that comes and destroys crops, same kind of a thing. Some sort of a plague. They're probably all of the above. Different plagues comes on the world. Okay, so there's several different types of plagues that happened, and they happen off and on. So if you look at the plague that happened in the early 1900s, and then the plague that happened in the early 2020s, those are plagues. Jesus says there's wars and there's rumors of wars and pestilences and diseases and the like. And so it doesn't actually say this in the Greek, but I tend to look at it like there's wars and rumors of wars. There's pestilences and rumors of pestilences. Maybe they just are hoarding the food and saying it was destroyed, black market, could be a bunch of stuff. And then there's plagues and probably rumors of plagues. So in either case, there's lots of stuff going on. That's why Jesus said, don't let your heart be afraid. Just trust in me. And one of the things is, and we do have to understand this, if you were to say, they say if I keep drinking, for instance, my liver will eventually die and I will die. Well, stop drinking alcohol and your liver will regenerate. So anyway, so the point is we need to be doing things to make ourselves healthy. And if we do the proper things, like in the book of Haggai, the Dead Sea Scrolls tell us about these things, we will probably be immune to most of these things if we're super healthy. So there's things to do to strengthen your immune system, those kind of things. And then there are other things. You don't need to necessarily use chemicals, but to guard yourself against the animals and those kind of plagues. I think of when Moses, the plague of animals during the time of the Exodus. There was flies, there were small animals, there were gnats, there were monsters that came, there were all sorts of things that came up and attacked. And there were things you could do to combat most of them. And but the children of Israel, of course, who were under God's blessing, were in the land of Goshen. They didn't have a problem with it. So anyway, we need to understand that. We need to be in God's blessing, number one. Number two, we need to do what we need to do to be healthy and to be able to combat some of these things. Of course, we may not be here at this, although this is over time, we may see some of this. So I will bring plagues upon the world, entire world, okay? The sword, famine, death, and destruction. Well, destruction to me, and I'm just guessing, but the destruction to me sounds like the wars. Everything that's been built is destroyed. They'll try to build it back up. Then there'll be another war and it'll be destroyed. I think of places like Beirut. As far back as I can remember, even being a kid, and I'm going to turn 60 this year, but I remember as a teenager, Beirut was in a civil war and it was okay. Then it was a civil war again. It's constant. How many times has that place been destroyed and rebuilt? It's just over and over and over again. So there's places like that. Destruction, death, sword definitely is people killing you. And that could be armies coming in, invading your land, or just terrorists. I think that's the word we use for now. Gangs, that come in, take over, try to do stuff like that. So anyway, and then famine, because they control the food or destroy the food. Usually food's not destroyed, it's confiscated by somebody. Anyway, and that happens a lot. So these kind of things are going to continue around the world. For wickedness has thoroughly polluted the entire earth, and their hurtful works are fulfilled. So this is the way things go. One of the things that I'm learning in some of the newer scrolls, we'll end up talking about in a few weeks, is the definition. They give the definition of an apostasy. And the apostasy is defined as when you get to the point, basically you get to the point where you would destroy or kill people who are preaching the gospel. So, maybe you don't like me because I'm a different denomination and you refuse to hang out with me. That's kind of the starting of it. You got to watch that. Maybe I am bad and you need to stay away from me, but pray for me then if that's the case. But the prayer to try to get me back where I should be is one thing, but avoiding me, ignoring me, and deciding that, he's just too weird, we need to kill him, that's a bad thing. So that's the epitome of this. And we get to the point where they tried to kill the Christians in the first century, those kind of things. So it's an interesting concept, this apostasy. So we need to guard against anyone who says, I am the true religion, and because you are different than me, I need to destroy you. That's the apostasy we're looking at. Whether you call yourself Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, Wicca, whatever, if you are in that category, then that's the total apostasy. And so when Paul talks about the apostasy forms, that's kind of what we're talking about. They will be killing Christians. That's nothing new because that happens all over the planet now. So anyway, we go on. Verse 7, it says, therefore says the Lord, I will not hold my tongue any more as touching their profanity or profanely committed wickedness. Neither will I allow them to continue practicing it. So there's a certain time where the Lord steps in and does something. And at first you're thinking this is last days. It's probably the tribulation period when he moves against the whole earth. But it could be little things before. And I see him stepping in and changing things in different places, probably all the way through the time. Otherwise, there probably would be no Christians left, that kind of thing. So he will make it come out the way he wants it to be. I won't hold my tongue anymore as touching their profanely committed wickedness. Neither will I allow them to continue practicing it. And this word here for profane, like taking the Lord's name in vain, a lot of times we think of that as just cussing. I stub my toe and I say, and that is cussing, and I shouldn't do that, and maybe say his name in a certain way. But when you say, even more important than that, when you say, I am a prophet of God, and you need to do whatever, and I know I'm lying, I'm taking his name in vain, that's an extremely bad thing to do. I mean, if you stub your toe and cuss in front of me, I'll probably say, let's work on, fixing that. But it's not that big of a deal compared to a false prophet that is manipulating and using people and hurting people. So profanity and taking the Lord's name in vain is much more than just cussing. And it's something we need to work on. How many people do you know on the internet that claim to be prophet so-and-so? And there's supposed to be prophets around, so somebody's correct, but almost all the prophets that I know of, I really, really question. So anyway, but I'm not going to allow them to continue practicing it. Think of it this way. If you have Pharisees and Sadducees that said, we're the true Judaism, and you got the Essenes and the Christians that teach something different, and they say, we're the true Judaism. One of the two is profane, one of the two is correct. Or possibly they're both wrong, but they can't both be right, in other words. So today we have Christianity and Islam, for instance. They both claim to be the true religion of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Ishmael. Well, one of us is correct, one of us is not. So for instance, in the Quran, it says, if you add to Allah, it's an unforgivable sin. Allah has no sons. In 1 John, in the Christian Bible, in 1 John, it says, if you do not confess that Jesus is the Son of God, you die in your sins. So no matter how you look at this, one book says one thing, the other book says the opposite. So they can't both be true. You either have to confess that Jesus is the Son of God, or you have to deny that Allah has any sons. You can't do both. He can't have a son and not have a son. So it's that kind of a thing. So that's just a point of doctrine, but I'm saying all these different religions claim to be the real religious, but the point is when they get to a place where they have to attack and kill people because their religion dictates it, that's when it's an apostasy. And that can form inside of Christianity, inside of Judaism, inside of Islam, Buddhism, probably every religion it could possibly be. So the concept of it's not the religion, but the terrorists, I think that's what we're talking about. Sometimes you'll see it translated like that. So he will not allow them to continue practicing this. Behold, innocent and righteous blood cries to me. The souls of the just complain continually. Therefore, says the Lord, I will surely receive the innocent slain by them and will avenge them. So this is getting interesting. What is the Lord going to do? So number one, by the way, there's lots of religions everywhere, but the United States is predominantly Christian, whether you consider that real Christianity or not. We claim to be Christian. Egypt would claim to be Muslim, and there's some Christians there, some Egyptian Orthodox, Monophysites, things like that, probably a little bit of lots of religions, the same in most places, but Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, Libya, Iran, Afghanistan, most of those places all claim to be Muslim, and that's the predominant religion there is Islam. Over here, predominant religion is Christian. Europe is kind of sort of neutral, or it used to be Christian, and I don't know what they claim anymore, but and then Israel, of course, is Jewish. Now there are Christians there are Buddhists and Muslims, and I know there's a Baha'i temple there. There's lots of different things, but the vast majority of people in Israel are Jewish. So with that in mind, understand the apostasy or an apostasy can form in any religion, anywhere. And evil people will just claim to be Jewish, Christian, Muslim, whatever, to manipulate. A con artist will claim to be anything. So anyway, in this case, when the Lord moves to stop this, there are some prophecies about Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Jordan, Turkey, Israel, of course, Egypt, Libya, other places. So let's go on and look at this. So he says, these people are evil. They get to a point it's really horrible, and the Lord steps in to do something. He's not going to allow it anymore. He says, behold, my people are led as a flock to the slaughter. I will no longer allow them to dwell in the land of Egypt. Now remember, this is, if it's fake, it's written in the Middle Ages. If it's real, it's written by Ezra. Ezra has just returned from, or is about to return from Babylon. There's nobody in Egypt, unless it's a metaphor for slavery, in which case that would be returning from Babylon. Possibly metaphors, but first we always take it literally. So they're no longer going to allow them to dwell in the land of Egypt. Okay. So they come out of Egypt, something happens to Egypt, there's some form of separation. Remember, one of the prophecies in the minor prophets talk about the Lord will send fishers, and then afterwards he will send hunters to make Israel return to the land of to Israel. And I interpret that, so what most people do, is that fishers are people that come and say, look, just migrate to Israel, we'll pay for it, you need to be here, etc. And some people take them up on it to get a better life, better jobs, whatever, or escape minor persecution, this kind of stuff. But other people say, no, I like it here. I make a lot of money and everything's great. So they stay there. So the fishers trying to coax you to come back to Israel are one thing. When that doesn't work on some people, the Lord will send or allow hunters. Hunters are people that attack their prey and destroy it. So that's intense persecution. So if you didn't come to Israel, you're supposed to eventually when you can. But if you chose not to because you make more money, life seems to be better there, it's going to be a little harder in Israel. Well, it'll be a lot harder when persecution comes. So both of these are used, fishing, coaxing, and hunting or persecution. So in this case, my people, that'd be Israel, are led as a flock to the slaughter. I will no longer allow them to dwell in the land of Egypt. So what's he going to do? I will bring them with a mighty hand and a stretched out arm, and I will smite Egypt with plagues as before. So there's going to be lots of plagues. Now, if you think of the plagues in Egypt, most of us remember the darkness, the animals, which I think our translations usually say gnats or swarms, but it's a plague of animals. There was the plague of just plagues on the animals. Hail destroyed the crops. Darkness, death of the firstborn. I forget. I don't have them memorized anymore. I used to, but anyway, so all of these things. So when you hear things like the Nile River or a certain river getting contaminated, not because of some weird company dumping chemicals in it, but it just occurs naturally. It becomes poisonous or red like blood, or all out of nowhere, major amount of locusts come in and within seconds just decimate, destroy the crops. Those are like biblical type plagues. But this will happen again as before and will destroy all the land of Egypt. Now there's a prophecy, actually it's in two places if I remember right, Zephaniah and somewhere else, maybe Isaiah, that talks about during the time of the Antichrist, something happens and the Nile River is destroyed. Well, if the Nile River is destroyed, maybe you can't really destroy it, but it's diverted. Something happens. So if the Nile River flow is diverted and the Nile River as we know it dries up, it'll be quagmire, mud, swamp type stuff instead of clean water. That'll create all sorts of plagues and that kind of stuff. And so we see, well, it goes on. There's a lot of extra detail to that. Somewhere along the line, this happens, though. Egypt will mourn, and its foundation will be stuck with the plague and punishment that God will bring upon it. They who till the ground will mourn because their seeds will fall by blight, hail, and scorching sun. None of that would be a problem if you had a good water supply. So I'm wondering if these aren't connected. So, if that's the case, this doesn't happen until the tribulation period, but it might be earlier. There's some other prophecies about Egypt that might be in our time period, but that's Egypt. So then we go on about wars and famine. It says, woe to the world and those that dwell therein. Now, honestly, the word for world is usually aretz, which means land. So we could be talking about the land of Israel. So you have to read in context if it's the entire globe or the known world, which would be like the Middle East, or the land of Israel specifically, or if it says the land of Egypt, Iraq, Israel, whatever. So this seems to be indicating the whole world. In either case, large portions. So woe to the world and those that dwell therein, for their destruction by the sword draws near. So it doesn't have to be Christian, Islamic, Jewish, whatever. You can always get a tyrant that rises up. Think of Joseph Stalin. Think of, was it Mao Zedong? I don't know my history anymore. Seems like I need to go back and double check it. But just think of Russia and China. Think of what happened between Pakistan and India over this last 100 years. How many thousands or tens or sometimes hundreds of thousands of people slaughtered for no reason other than we're right, you're wrong. The apostasy hit. Not necessarily Christian or Jewish, but just I'm right, you're wrong. My religion dictates I must wipe this concept out. Think of the Middle Ages with the things like the Languedoc with the Cathari in the south of France. Many of you will remember, and some of you may not, we've got lots of movies about Friday the 13th being a bad day because evil things happen on it. And it's become like a superstition because nobody remembers what actually happened. And the Friday the 13th being a bad day goes all the way back to October, Friday the 13th, 1307. That's when the decision was made. Well, the decision was made before then to destroy the Cathari because they had some documents that the medieval church, trying to say this right, did not like. And between the medieval church and the King of France, they decided on October, Friday the 13th, 1307, what to send in the troops and confiscate all of the Cathari and basically destroy all of them. Not just slaughter them, but tortures, medieval torture chambers and all that. Almost every man, woman, and child in the Languedoc was slaughtered under the orders of whoever was in power. I forget the kings and stuff names anyway, but I mean, most of us forget that. That was a horrible, horrible event. I don't know how many people that is, but it's basically genocide. You wiped out an entire section of group of people because of a religious difference. Okay. So now if they were warlike and caused problems, you'd have to go to war and fix the problem. But these kind of things are usually different. So things like that we got to be careful with. So they will be destroyed by the sword. The sword is drawing near because this is a judgment of God. One people will stand up and fight against another with hand weapons. So this is interesting. If that's the literal interpretations, it's not so much missiles and stuff like that, but people, subgroup. It sounds like gangs, with knives, forks, guns, handguns or something, not like missiles and tanks, but hand weapons. There will be seditions among men and invasions. Seditions are usually somebody deciding to take over the government. And invasions is somebody, invading another land to take over land or that government. They will not regard their kings nor rulers, and by the course of their actions usurp their power. In medieval times, we always had the concept of God ordained the king, so we will serve the king, whoever the rightful king is. And you didn't have this concept was, I don't like the king. I think I'll sneak around back, wipe out him and his family, declare myself the new king. That does happen, but it's not logical with that type of thinking. In this case, this is going to be more and more and more. So seditions among men and invasions. They will not regard their kings or rulers, and by the course of their actions usurp their power. A man will desire to go into a city and will not be able. So freedom of travel is a thing. Now, in the midst of a war, usually things are sealed off. And just to let you know, It's always been, as far back as I can remember, if there is a war situation or a plague or something, some reason why you shouldn't go there, the government tells you you shouldn't go there because it is a war, it's a plague, or what. If you go there, you'll probably die if you don't know what you're doing. But you still have the option to do what you want to because you're a free agent. Government never tells you you are forbidden to go there because of, not their power. Not supposed to be that way in the United States anyway. So it's interesting. In this case, you won't be able to go to certain cities. So that could be some sort of segregation. Remember, this is the whole world now. It could be religious groups, differences, it could be just general wars, but things will be freedom is gone, is what it's saying. And this is why. For because of the pride of the usurpers, the cities will be troubled, the houses will be destroyed, and men will be afraid. Think of the current situation in Syria. One group came in, overthrew the government, which happens, and the government says it's one way or another, but be that as it may, no matter what the government's doing, there are subgroups of people that are going in trying to destroy things. And that's normal because if the current government is wiped out, the criminal element is going to say, well, now it's the time to go steal the things we want. Nobody can stop us. By the time they figure it out, we'll be gone out of the country with the jewels or whatever, the money. So that's kind of normal for the criminal element. But you've got groups of people that are destroying the Druze or trying to destroy all of the Druze and all of the Alawites because they're a different sect, different religion, or even just a sect of my own religion, which is bad enough to go destroy. So that kind of stuff happens all the time, but this becomes more and more at this time. Now notice, if you go back in the Old Testament, there's many places where the Lord sends confusion. One of my favorite places, I think, is when the Moabites and I think the Ammonites, two different groups, joined together to come to destroy Israel. And there's lots of battles, and the prophet says to the people, go ahead and take your armor off and leave your armor and your weapons at home this time, and get these really big knapsacks, and we'll go out to the field of the battle, and I want everybody to set down on the side of the mountain and watch what the Lord does. And they came in, and the Lord sent confusion on Edom and Moab. Edom thought Moab was Israel. Moab thought Edom was Israel, and they attacked each other. And Israel just sat there and watched it until they slaughtered all of them. Both the enemies killed the enemies off. Then the high priest or the prophet or whoever was there said, now take the knapsacks, go get the spoils, and go home and celebrate. You know that you sat there and watched it. You know the Lord did it. You didn't do a thing. It's not by your power. He decided to intervene. And you've got examples like that, many examples throughout the Old Testament. In the Battle of Gog and Magog, in one section, it says the same thing. I'll send confusion and they will attack each other. Those kind of things. So the Lord can do all sorts of things. So we don't want to be in our own strength trying to fix the problem. Sometimes you need to make sure you're in his will. So it says, because of the pride of the usurpers, the cities will be troubled, the houses will be destroyed, and men will be afraid. A man will have no pity on his neighbors, but will destroy their houses with the sword and spoil their goods because of the lack of bread and great tribulation. Not necessarily the great tribulation, but great trouble, great tribulation, lack of bread. This happened to Israel. If you read Eusebius, father of church history, and Josephus, Jewish historian, they both have detailed, quite a bit of detail, on the destruction of the Jerusalem temple in 70 AD, and the situation and the horrible people that ruled. They were basically mob ruling at the time, and it was really, really bad if you read that stuff. Same kind of thing is going to happen here. Okay, so that's wars and famine in general all over the world. the confusion that the Lord sends for people to divide. Now, this is interesting here. We're going to look at this part, and then we'll stop at this part because the next part talks about the dragon nations and how they form. And we need to figure out who those are. So this is specifically Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iraq, and Lebanon. So again, the groups, the nations that surround Israel, those would be the closest to Israel. And just to say, every one of these happens to be Islamic, just saying, while Israel is Jewish and we're Christian. So that kind of thing, as far as the government structure. It says, behold, says God, I will gather together all the kings of the earth to reverence me, which are from the rising of the sun, from the south, from the east, from Lebanon, to turn themselves one against the other and repay the things that they have done to each other. So let's look at this. The rising of the sun, that's in the east. So you could think possibly China, that's about as far east as you can get, but you're talking about the area of the people around Israel. So normally in a lot of the Old Testament passages, the nation that's at the rising of the sun in the east is Iran. Or technically it's Persia. And Persia and Elam came together to form Iran. So it's the Persians at that point. From the south, you go all the way to the south in that area in the Middle East, that's Yemen. So at this time, there's going to be a war or series of wars that happen between Iran and Yemen, and then from the east. So if you go east, or no, from the east, from the south, rising of the sun, other eastern areas would be Iraq. Okay, Iraq and those places. So Saudi Arabia and those places are south. So we're talking about east. And then it talks about south, could be Saudi Arabia, Yemen specifically, and Lebanon. So there's going to be a situation where you have at the very least Lebanon, Persia, which is Iran, Yemen, and probably Iraq, and then Lebanon. So that whole crescent. Think of the way the Jews are describing it now, the axis of evil. If Iran is actually or was actually funding these groups, I'm just saying if. I'm trying to be neutral on the platform that we're on. So anyway, if Iran has funded Iraq and Iraq has funded Lebanon and Lebanon the other groups and Hamas and the whole area, they would all be connected. Right now, there's a war situation going on with Yemen, with Hamas, which is a whole other set of prophecies. You can go back in our prophecy section we did last year and see the prophecies specifically about Hamas, when it was to happen, how it ends. And when we plug in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we learn when it actually ends and what happens right after that. So very interesting set. So this is the groups we're talking about. So Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, those areas. Probably some more than others, but the people that surround Israel. It says, for all these, it says, to turn themselves one against the other and to repay for the things that they have done one to the other. It seems like certain Muslim factions, especially Sunni versus Shia, seem to always be at war. And then neither group likes the Alawites or the Druze or whatever. Israel, on the other hand, definitely does not, they're not Druze, they're not Muslim, they're not anything else, but they don't want people to attack and kill people because they're a different religion. Over here in the United States, we don't want to attack people to attack and kill people because they're another religion. That's, again, the Apostle Paul's definition of apostasy. So anyway, as they will do this, as they still do this day, or to this day, to my chosen. So each one of these groups are fighting amongst themselves, but they also do not like the chosen, which would be Israel. So that makes perfect sense. We see that going on today. So I will do also and recompense it to their bosom. So basically, it sounds like because these groups hate Israel and would attack Israel, the Lord sends confusion amongst them so that they tend to attack each other. That'll keep the number of people down and the armaments down and things like that. Thus says the Lord God, my right hand, that's usually a symbol or a metaphor for the Messiah, my right hand will not spare the sinners. My sword will not cease over those who shed innocent blood upon the earth. And this is one of the things we got to realize. Some people may say, well, you're not my religion, therefore you're not innocent. And I am commanded by my religion to execute you. Okay, that may be true on paper for whatever religion we're talking about, but according to God, that's not the way it works. Non-innocent blood is people who steal, murder, rape, whatever, commit crimes. Those are not innocent. People, now we all have a sin nature, so we need a savior, but as far as crimes go, most of us have not committed crimes like that. And specifically, we're talking about murderers. Because you're whatever, I need to kill you. So that kind of a thing. Let's see. I will not spare the sinners, or my sword will not cease over those who shed innocent blood on the earth. That's that apostasy concept that we need to watch out for. The fire is gone forth from his wrath. In other words, he's beginning to act now in this section, and has consumed the foundations of the earth, and the sinners will be like straw that is kindled. So at this point, when he actually moves, he destroys all of them. We saw that in the previous chapter about when the Son of Man, the Messiah, comes, everybody stops fighting everybody and turns on him. And without a single weapon in his hand, he just simply looks at them, boom, they're all gone. So total annihilation of people that are evil. And then there's a large group of people that were not fighting each other because they believe in the scriptures. They don't do apostasy. They may be different religions or different denominations, but they refuse to kill people. So just wars are one thing. Self-defense is one thing, but you don't kill people because you want something. Okay, anyway, fire is gone forth. Okay, so number here. Woe to them who sin and do not keep my commandments, says the Lord. So in the commandments, we've got the moral parts in the beginning. You've got things like, and I'm not giving these in order or anything, but do not kill, do not fornicate, do not steal. So those are the basics of human morality. So you believe something that I don't. I still don't want to steal from you, kill you, or anything like that. So it says, I will not spare them. Okay. Go your way, children, from the power. Do not defile my sanctuary. Now, where's the Lord's sanctuary at? It doesn't exist at the moment. Maybe it does when this happens. That's kind of interesting. But in either case, the place where his sanctuary is, or is supposed to be, is the Temple Mount. It's not the Dome of the Rock. It will be, according to prophecy, a rebuilt Jerusalem, a rebuilt temple on the area where Solomon's temple was, wherever. I know there's a debate on exactly where, but point being, there will be a rebuilt temple. And according to the church fathers, the Jews are going to be the ones that build it. Christians have no need for a temple in that sense. We wouldn't build something like that. Do not defile my sanctuary. And I would just say, do not defile the Temple Mount either. For the Lord knows all who sin against him, and he will deliver them to death and destruction. For this reason, the plagues will now come upon the whole earth, and you who remain in them, for God will not deliver you because you have sinned against him. And this does sound kind of like maybe it's in the tribulation period, but in either case, sometimes God moves, and he's done it in the past. He may be moving now, as far as what this is talking about, or it might be tribulation period. So that's the section we want to cover tonight. Now, next week, we're going to get to this next section here about the dragon nations. They're called the dragon nations of Arabia, not because it's just Arabia, but a movement starts in Arabia somewhere and spreads out. And there's prophecies about exactly who it is we're talking about, how they come together, and what happens. And so this drifts into prophecies about the north, south, and the west. And then eventually we get to a place where they attack Babylon. And so some of the dragon nations apparently are in the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire in the last part forms 10 nations that comes against a Babylonian system. So this would give us a clue on who Babylon is, or at least tell us who Babylon is not, and maybe some of the others. So there's a lot of information in here about it. We'll go through that next time. But so this is a start. So again, we see things like in the chapter 38 and 39 of Ezekiel, which is the Gog-Magog war. It has the same MO as this and many of the other Old Testament prophecies about, Israel is being attacked by a large number of people, and the Lord will send confusion so they would attack each other. So interesting things to happen. We'll go ahead and stop there for tonight, and I'll go over to the chat room and see if there's any questions. Okay, yeah, it looks like we got quite a few. Let me come here. And first question, is the iron mixed with clay on the statue in Daniel today's world of Rome or humans mixed with technology, in other words, AI, making the leaders cyborg? That's one of the theories. I suppose it's possible. It could be several different ideas. Basically, we're told that there are 10 nations that form out of what used to be Rome, and they don't adhere one to the other, meaning they're too democratic. A king, for instance, would have one person that would simply say, this is what we're going to do, and we're done. But when you've got, especially if it's an even number, especially 10, if you had 5 people vote one way and 5 vote another, tied vote. If you had 9 or 11, you wouldn't have that problem. There'd always be a decision made. But these guys don't go together. Somehow they're too democratic. Their leaders, it says that they mingle themselves with the seed of men. That could be Nephilim. That could be kings that decide to be a little too democratic, mixing their power with the power of the people, which, if in the right circumstances, would make it impossible for them to make decisions. Too democratic, in other words, rather than not democratic enough. So it could be several things like that. The main thing is that we need to look for 10 nations that arise out of what used to be the Roman Empire. And I think we still have a little bit of Rome left before we actually get to that part. So good question. The 2 puny feathers for the end time under the Russian head. Basil II and Constantine VIII married sister Anna to Vladimir the Great, heeding his military might. Vladimir Putin claims to align Okay, it goes on down here a little bit. Align. Let me just run to that one here. Um, 988 AD, marriage to Anna, okay, to 1453, when Byzantine falls, is 465 years. Add from the 1453 AD to another, the same 465, and you get the 1917 fall of the last Russian Tsar. Okay, that's interesting. That's something to study. I don't know if there's anything to it or not, but that would be something to look at. A lot of us think that when the 1453, when the Byzantine Empire fell, some of the daughters escaped and went and married into the Russian line. And that would create later on, it was about 100 years before they started calling themselves czars. But the whole idea of calling yourself a czar, that's the Russian word for Caesar, means somehow you think you're a direct descendant. That would be true if your great, 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 great grandmother was one of the daughters of the last actual Caesar from the Byzantine Empire. If that's true, that makes Russia, the Russian Empire, the last part or one of the heads of the three-headed eagle, which would be part of the Roman Empire. And so we still have the left head, which is Rome, which is rather Russia. So it still has things yet to do. And I think they're finally destroyed. This is just my opinion. I think they're finally destroyed in the Gog-Magog invasion. And so because of that, if they're actually the end of the Roman Empire, then the 10 nations would form after Rome completely falls, which is after Russia is completely decimated. And so they're not completely decimated yet. So I think we're seeing the end times coming. If I'm right, it's going to be a little bit of time left before everything comes to head. But according to the Essene calendar, we're getting ready to enter the last Jubilee, or the last generation, in March of 2026. So from that time forward is when I think most of these things are going to take place. But that's something to look at. Very interesting. Thank you. If prophets like Ezra, Enoch, and Elijah were taken up to heaven and never died, what are some possible implications? For example, could they have served in the Council of Nicaea? If the Lord would have let them come back, that's an interesting thing. We wouldn't know for sure. The prophecies are that Elijah comes back, and we usually assume that that's someone in the spirit and power of Elijah, like John the Baptist was. But it could be very well literal, because this is one of the few that never died. So that's a good point. What is the consensus on the date Second Ezra was written? Well, the earliest copy we have is about 200 AD. That doesn't mean anything. It just simply means it's at least 200 AD or further back. So the people that want to say that it's fake would say it was created in 200 AD. It's supposed to be from Ezra going further back. I think the main idea that we need to look at, though, is when we go back and we look at the prophecies, like the animal kingdom and some other things, and this stuff here with the creation of the dragon nations and those things. If we have it back as early as 200 AD, and it accurately predicted the fall of Rome and the breakup in 476 with the proper amount of Caesars, and accurately predicted, no matter how you do it, that's several hundred years before Islam even formed. And it's going to predict in the next section the rise of the Islamic Empire and the things that happen with it. So if the oldest copy is 200 AD and it's got several prophecies that came to pass correctly, that would let you understand it's real prophecy. So if it's real prophecy, it can't be a fake document, or at least somebody that's putting things together, trying to be Ezra, is pulling these from another real prophet somewhere. So they're prophecies that need to be looked at. But yeah, the earliest copy that I know of is 200 AD. We've got 2 or 3 that are around 400 AD, which is still at least 75 years older than when the first of those prophecies took place. So, and so far they're hitting it correctly. And this is one reason why the Anglicans included 2nd Esdras in the 1611 King James. Could the first seal be a global subjugation using masks, toxon, and corona, crown, and the second seal be increased anxiety and many people dying because of a very small stabs or jobs? I don't think so. I don't think that that has anything to do with anything other than if there is something wrong with the jabs that you're talking about, whatever's being injected in people. If there is something wrong with it, it's going to cause problems in health later on. And we have the prophecies about the increase in aging, the earlier puberty, getting earlier and earlier, the graying of hair, things like that, the babies being born much earlier than normal, things like that. That would be something that would mess up our genetics. Something happens according to prophecy to do something like that. But as far as like the seals, I would consider the first seal to be the rise of the Antichrist, the start of the 7-year tribulation period. And then the second seal would be the wars that he takes to completely conquer, bringing death, destruction by the ones talked about there, and then the plague, which is mainly starts in Egypt and goes north. And then you have the persecutions. There's 2 separate waves of major persecutions in the beginning, and then you get to the middle part. So I personally don't think any of it has started yet. So if it happens that way, then it's still yet future. But most of the church fathers talked about the rider of the white horse as being either the church age starting or the Antichrist. And if they thought the church age starting, then they thought the rider on the red horse would be the Antichrist. So it's talking about the major pieces. I think we're going to see, even if this stuff has caused major health issues, then it's part of a prophecy about like the aging and that kind of stuff. But I don't think it has anything to do with the major pieces of Revelation. Just my 2 cents. Dr. Ken, as a recovering Catholic, I'm just curious as to your opinion on the new Pope, the Malachi prophecy, and the current events. I also understand if you'd rather not comment. Thanks for the studies. Well, just briefly, I can just comment on it briefly. As far as the Malachi prophecy goes, there's a set number, and I know you could read it a couple of different ways, but the one way of reading it is that the last pope that it prophesied was 2 popes ago. And then if you look at it the other way, it's 1 pope ago. That sounds like a word, but you know what I'm saying. So now we have a new pope, which it was either supposed to be this last pope or the one before him, is what I'm saying, if I'm reading the Malachi prophecy correctly, unless there's a different version and there's more stuff, which is always possible, because it seems like it hit really well up to a point, unless it was written after the fact, which is always a possibility. So the new pope seems to be more traditional Catholic than the last pope. Seems like it. But there's a couple of, you can read it online, a couple of things where people kind of question him. So we'll see what actually happens. And he didn't call himself Peter, the Roman or whatever. He's an American, and he calls himself Leo the 14th. That was the name that he took. So it doesn't quite fit with the Malachi prophecy, even though that's supposed to be 1 or 2 back from him. So it seems like there's either a mix-up in the prophecy or the prophecy is fake, which I would still be looking at the prophecy to see if it's always possible there's a couple of different copies and one has 1 or 2 more popes than the other copy. So it would be something to look at. Don't just throw it out. But there's more to it than the current version that I have seen anyway. And I believe he's 69 years old. So I'm 59. I think he's a decade older than me. So if he's 69, most likely, even if he lives to be like 100 or something, that's 30 years. I doubt he's going to be the last pope based on the timeline of the Essenes. So it seems like there'd be at least one or two more, but we're getting close to the end. That's just my guess on the subject, and I'm by no means an expert, just a wild guess on my part. Thanks for the question, though. Those are things we need to look at. So he will definitely take the church in some direction, the Roman Catholic Church in some direction, either back a little bit to the way they used to be, or a little more progressive or something. So we'll have to wait and see what he does exactly and how it begins to affect things. Next question is, the last couple thousand years, there was a calendar change that shows us further away from the rapture. You explained it in one of your videos or books. Please help me find it. There's a lot of calendar changes over the years, but the one that we use right now, the Gregorian, goes all the way back to, it's either 46 or 48 BC, when Julius Caesar kind of put it together. He revamped the calendar. So that was the Julian calendar. And it stayed that way up until Pope Gregory realized that we were getting off. There needs to be a couple of extra exceptions to the leap year. So it's the exact same calendar, but there's once in a while we don't have a leap year every 4 years. And so that kind of balanced everything out. And in the Middle Ages, there were, I think, 11 days that they just took off the calendar to put everything back in sync. So that happened. As far as the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, they say, and there's no way to prove or disprove this, but they say it's an accurate calendar from creation up to their time, and they give the date. So that part is succinct. And then they talk about how it syncs, or what today is compared to the Julian calendar of that time period. So we know our calendar is correct as far as like the Sabbaths, the weekly Sabbaths and things like that, going back to 46 BC. And if the Essenes in the first century said, here's our connection with it, then we can calculate it out. So I think the Dead Sea Scroll calendar is pretty accurate. And it's got some really amazing things to study with it. That's about the only thing I know. I know Chuck Missler talked about like around 808 BC or something. There was something that happened and people had to change their calendars. Several different groups around the globe changed their calendars or did something. So I haven't studied that part too much. I'm just staying on the fact that we have the Essenes talking about here creation to their time. And if they connect it with the Julian calendar goes from 46 BC to now, we should be able to calculate what year we're in. By the way, that's dsscalendar.org if you want to go there and see how we did it. And we do have a calendar book too that gives more information. So that's about all I remember from that kind of stuff. Another question. What is the difference between holy, elect, and righteous? Well, elect means chosen. And so a lot of times it refers to the Jewish nation because they were chosen to be different, to prepare the way for the Messiah. The Messiah would come through the nation of Israel. We are elected to salvation in a sense if we're Christian. So sometimes the Christians are called elect, sometimes Jews are, depends on the section. It just means chosen in some way or for some purpose. Holy is basically to be dedicated to the Lord. It's not that you're sinless per se, but you are pious, and is another way of saying it, I think. So in other words, maybe I'm not sinning per se, but I'm caught up in the cares of this world. taking care of my family, making money, paying off my debts, just doing stuff. And I'm not spending any time studying the Word of God or trying to get close to God. If I spend a lot of my free time studying scriptures and trying to get close to God, then I'm pious or somewhat holy. I can never be perfectly holy because I'm a sinner and I make mistakes. So that's that. Righteous, on the other hand, is specifically about doing right or doing wrong. So the righteous people are those that try to do what's right, as opposed to the unrighteous, which try to commit crimes, like criminals. So that kind of a thing. And the words are used somewhat interchangeably and in different degrees at different scriptures, which is not too odd. I mean, we do the same thing in English. So, but that's basically it. Holy people, if you are holy, another way of saying it is that you're sanctified. The Lord sets you apart for something. And so, also, holy, the people that are holy, is usually called saints. So, if you're a believer in Messiah and you're trying to do what's right, whether you fail or not, you are a saint. So, you are set apart. So, I think that that's how those words are used a lot of times. And there are Old Testament to give you the idea that holy is basically dedicated. There are Old Testament passages that talk about you being set apart or holyized, so to speak, for evil or for good. So it just means like dedicated or chosen. If you decide to be a master criminal and you work hard at doing it, you're focused on it. So it's kind of used that way. So lots of interesting word studies in that. I watched on YouTube, I can't remember, I can't quote what was said, but something like Paul was taught for 3 years in Arabia by what could have been the Essenes. The doctor says, introduced a convincing argument. What's your opinion? I believe so. Paul talks about in Galatians when he talks about he prayed in the temple. Well, in Acts, he's praying in the temple, and God tells him to get up and leave because the Jews will seek to kill him. So he gets up and he leaves. And it says that he, in Galatians, he got up and he left, and he went to Arabia, that area, and spent so many years there. And then he went back to his hometown, and then he went to Damascus. And this is after the Damascus incident. And the Dead Sea Scrolls talk about Qumran. One of the names for Qumran that they called it is Damaski, which is the same as Damascus, although it's not an Arabic name, it's a Hebrew name, and it means city of the blood heir. So in other words, city of the Messiah. So in the Damascus covenant, Qumran is called New Damascus. So in other words, when he says he went to Arabia, then he went up to Damascus, and then he went up to Jerusalem, and and that kind of stuff. If you look at it this way, it would be more like this on the map if you're talking about Damascus, Syria. But if you're talking about Qumran, it would make sense. And he says he goes there and he spends 3 years there. Then he goes up to Jerusalem and goes directly to talk to Peter and James, specifically the leaders of the church. So in that case, one of the other things in the scrolls is that if you're studying to become an Essene, the law that they have, their tradition is that it takes 3 years to study. You're like an apprentice for the first year, then there's a second year, then there's a third before you could actually be, considered a brother. So he goes there and studies the other prophecies. Because what has happened is he's grown up and he's seen Pharisees and Sadducees. He's decided Sadducees are garbage, so he's going to be a Pharisee and then do the best. Then the Messiah comes, reveals himself to him on the road to Damascus where he's blinded. Now he knows the basic Pharisee doctrine as far as Messiah goes is not true. Well, the only major one left is the Essenes. Starts looking at the prophecies, realizes they're probably at least closer to the truth than the Pharisees. So he goes and studies them. One of the things that I believe also is he's studying the testaments, because that's the heart of Essene doctrine, is the testaments of the patriarchs. In the testament of Benjamin, it talks about when the Messiah comes for the first time, there will be a new covenant, and it's the age of grace. And for this new covenant, there will be a new canon. The old canon is closed. You don't add to the Old Testament, but there will be a New Testament, a new canon. And it would be made up of teachings from the Messiah. That's Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John. And a history of how things got started, or how things were fulfilled, that kind of stuff. That's Acts. And then it will also contain a series of epistles written by some Benjamite that will actually answer all the questions. So it says this very clearly in the text. And so I believe Paul realized this and realized he's Benjamite. He's probably the only one to do this. And he does the missionary trips, and the Lord blesses it. So I think what's going on is he's going up to Jerusalem, talking to Peter and James and saying, guess what, guys? I'm a Benjamite. You know, the prophecies, this is what's happened to me in all of my trips. And they look at him, they realize, yeah, there's no other Benjamite doing this. Apparently he's the one. So they give him the right hands of fellowship. Say, apparently this doesn't look right to us, you know, Gentiles and all, but apparently it's part of the prophecies. So they give him the right hand of fellowship. And I think that's why throughout his epistles, he talks about, hey, I'm the apostle to the Gentiles. We're going to do it this way. And I don't think he's being prideful so much as it's like, hey, I was commissioned to do this. And if I don't do it right and make sure you understand it right, I'm going to be held accountable. So I don't think Paul was prideful at all. I think he was extremely humbled at the fact that God called him, and it's written in the text that this would happen. There's a lot of more prophecies in the scrolls, but I think that all kind of comes together. But that's my opinion. I actually think that he went to Damascus, Syria, to attack Christians. And that's where he had the vision, and he was blinded, and he saw Jesus and realized it, and then they healed him. They let him down out of Damascus, Syria, and he escaped. And then it says he went to Arabia for a number of years, and then up to Damascus, which is either Damascus, Syria, or Qumran. But he stayed there and studied 3 years. What was he studying? You know, it's the Essene way, probably. Then he goes up to James and Peter to say, guess what, guys? I'm the apostle of the Gentiles. And they understood the prophecies and immediately said, yeah, you're the only one, you're the only Benjamite, and you're the only one doing these things, and the Lord is blessing it. You are successful. It's got to be you. And of course, Paul writes all the epistles. And that's why I think Peter immediately understood that. Because remember in Peter, he says, Paul writes some things that are hard to understand, and the unstable or the unlearned wrest them to their own destruction, as they do the other scriptures. So even while they're still alive, Peter is recognizing what Paul is writing is part of the new canon. So there's a lot of evidence. It's all circumstantial, I guess, but there's a lot of evidence to put this stuff together. In either case, we need to pay close attention to the epistles of Paul. I remember when I was telling some of the cool things about the scrolls to my pastor, and he's like, well, be careful. We need to stay focused on the New Testament. And I said, well, actually, according to the scrolls, all the answers for anything you would need are in the writings of this Benjamite, the epistles of Paul. So the scrolls are telling us to go read those. And he's like, well, all right then. He was really happy at that point because they pointed back, because a lot of the weird stuff gets you off and away from scriptures. This turns around and points you right back to it. So really interesting stuff. Isn't Libya known as Put or Cush in scripture? Yeah. Cush is like Sudan. It's further down than Egypt. Put, though, is Libya. And of course, the borders, change over the centuries back and forth. So, but basically Put is Libya, yeah. So they're mentioned in the Gog-Magog war. I wonder if Libya figures into this. A leader in Libya was just assassinated hours ago, and apparently the whole country's in chaos. That's happened many times. It sounds like there might be gangs or factions vying for power. It's been like that for a while. There's been a couple of major, well, they call themselves armies. They probably are, but yeah, that's going to continue happening, I think. Again, think about that though. Rather than one person being in power, there are sub factions fighting each other for power. That's what we just read in the Ezra Apocalypse, and we read in other places in Scripture about how God will cause division amongst them so that they don't basically destroy everything. It's interesting how we see that kind of stuff. Question. So is this chapter teaching that Jews will flee from Egypt again? I cannot reconcile that with anything in Scripture. They definitely leave. And maybe this is somewhat in the past because there are definitely not that many Jews in Egypt, I wouldn't think. There used to be a lot in Egypt and Saudi Arabia and other places. So, yeah, I don't know what exactly is going on. Unless, of course, you consider that back in the 50s, well, actually even further back, the Gaza Strip was owned by Egypt. And then they kind of became independent, but Egypt still had control over them. So in that case, part of Egyptian land was the Gaza Strip. So it may fall into a lot of different angles like that. So that's a good question, though. I'm not sure exactly, but it's something to think about. Hit the thumbs up, brothers and sisters. Yeah, if you like this content, please like and subscribe. It helps our ratings go up so we can get more funding for the ministry. There's some exciting things coming in the next, even the next month or so. More Hebrew manuscripts that you will really, really like to see. I've been telling the members, we have a members study also. Been telling the members about it and giving them pieces to it. So it's going to be really interesting, I think. Been a member for 21 months, level angel message. Why do you think once supernatural entities are revealed, the government wants this info concealed, top secret, and not to be disclosed or shared? It's probably got something to do with a vie for power. If I suddenly, like I live in a city, if I suddenly realize that there's some sort of mafia type thing that controls City Hall, and I don't tell anybody that because they might kill me. But if I keep it quiet and talk to the right guys, I might get involved in the mafia, which might give me some power and some wealth. So I think it's probably like that. I think that's the major reason why people keep a lot of things quiet. If I keep it quiet and I'm the only one that knows, maybe I can use this to my advantage. That would be my guess. Other than that, I don't know for sure. Somewhere along the line, that'll change, though. Why do you think the Book of Enoch, as well as others, were not canonized or included in the biblical canon? Oh, they weren't supposed to be. In the first section of Enoch, it talks about there will be a canon that the righteous live their life by. And then that's also mentioned up in like chapter 50 something. But in the first section, it talks about how his work is not to be added to that collection. It is specifically for those in the period of the great trial or tribulation and right before. Although it's been revived, so to speak, for 100 years or so. But when you're talking about a 6,000 year period, 100 years or two is right before. But yeah, it's supposed to be that way. They're supposed to, and that's what we were reading on this a couple of years, or, not years, a couple of times back. The chapter on the sacred books, if you can see that right here, it talks about how the Old Testament's supposed to be just the 39 books that we know of, categorized differently, so it's 24. And then there's a series of other books that are to be not in the public canon for everybody to look at, but only for other people. So the prophecies, extra biblical prophecies, and things like that. So that's the kind of thing that we're looking at. A lot of people get confused and think, well, if it's anything worth anything, it would be in the canon. But there's so many historical texts and other things that if they were all in the canon, it would be too huge for anybody to really study. And it's interesting to look at. There's a section in the Tana Eliyahu, which is a commentary on the School of the Prophets, Elijah's School of the Prophets. And there's one section that quotes Elijah, and he basically is covering this. He basically says, you understand that God created the canon. I'm paraphrasing this, but basically, God created the canon, so you need to pay attention to it. And God created the School of the Prophets, and if they are real prophecy from real prophets, that had to come from God also. And this kind of question comes up about, well, if it's not in the canon, we shouldn't read it type stuff. And it was interesting. The quote from Elijah basically said, you understand God created the canon and God created the School of the Prophets with their writings, and you have a problem reconciling both. God could speak 20 different ways, and it would be important to listen to anything God had to say. So apparently in his day he had the same thing. It's like, the canon is closed, this stuff is not in it, so we shouldn't look at it. And his attitude was, if God wrote both sets, it would be like today if I said, well, we have the New Testament, so don't ever read the Old Testament. Same kind of a thing, which there are some groups that do that. But we need to focus mainly on the New Testament, but secondarily on the Old Testament. And then thirdly, I would say, on the School of the Prophets. This is a good question, though. Could Constantine be the start of the Roman Catholic Church, being a Roman emperor, and also the Catholic Church is an extension of the Roman Empire? Oh, okay. As far as the prophecies goes, yeah, a lot of people have thought that, and you're at first you would probably say no, because the Pope doesn't have an army or anything. Like, it's definitely not an empire. But the religious extension, in the Middle Ages, he could make or break kings by saying, what is that thing called? Placing an interdict on their country. So everybody believed that if a pope placed an interdict on your country, everybody that currently died in that country while the interdict was on instantly goes to hell. And that's just, you're done. That he has that kind of authority. And so, if he places an interdict on your country, most likely they're going to assassinate the king like in 5 minutes. Nobody wants to take the chance of dying and going to hell. And so he actually could control kings. So if he needed an army to do something, he would just order one of the kings or two of them to do something, and it would be done. So in that sense, with that kind of power, you could call that an empire. Even though he doesn't really have his own army, he has the armies of everybody else at his disposal. So not saying that that is the case, but there is an argument there for it being an extension. I think if we can pull all the other prophecies together, the other pieces of Daniel from the scrolls, the other scrolls in general, Ezra Apocalypse, and a few others, I think we can try to basically get a general idea of how this stuff works. So that is a possibility. I don't know that it's true, but it's something to keep in the back of your mind. It's like when they say, well, maybe the 10 nations is this, it's not really nations, but this ethnic group or groups of people. Well, any set of 10 anything, we need to take a look at. Probably not, but don't rule it out, because until it actually happens, you really don't know. It's just 10 something. So if there's two groups of 10 nations doing something, we look at both of them. Not sure which one's which. So it's the same kind of deal. So it's definitely the Catholic Church and the Pope, maybe not the current one, but somewhere along the line, will be involved in this according to the prophecies of Gad the seer. It's really specific in there. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's Babylon or that's an empire or the 10 nations or anything, but it's involved somehow. Aren't Christians and Christian Zionists starting to divide? Yeah, it seems like it. And I think it's, well, we've kind of always been that way in a sense. We've always had the idea of, in the Calvinistic, and not even necessarily all Calvinists, but there's always been a replacement theology, even amongst Catholics and stuff. Catholics, Calvinists, most Lutherans, I think, too. But there's a lot of, in the Baptists now, too, but Reformed movement and others, a lot of them think the prophecies about Israel that haven't been fulfilled somehow symbolically go to the church because Israel's out of the picture. It's like they sinned and God said, I'm done. But then I've got to do something with these prophecies, so I'll redo them and put them on Christians. The problem with that, though, is that God knows past, present, and future. And so God's not going to say, ooh, I didn't see that one coming. I think I'll redo this and just focus it on Christians. So it's the same kind of an argument that the Jews will do in Daniel chapter 9. It very specifically talks about Daniel coming before the destruction of the temple and gives you an approximate date of around 30, 33, something like that, AD, give or take whatever, but around 30 AD, the Messiah should come. And the Jews say, well, the Messiah didn't come. And, well, why didn't he? Well, we must have done something bad and God changed his mind. Problem with that is that God knew ahead of time you would do something bad and he would change his mind. So that's basically lying. If, in other words, God sent an angel to tell the prophet Daniel that I'm going to do this, knowing full well that you would mess up, he would get mad and not do it. So he knows he's not going to do that, but he sent a prophet to lie to an angel to lie to a prophet. That doesn't make any sense. And so according to Daniel, if the prophecy would have said, if you do this, I will send him on this date. And if you don't, you'll have to wait another couple thousand years. If it said that, then that would be fine. It doesn't say that. And to take that route, you're going to have to say God gets confused or God lies. And that's not possible. So somehow the Messiah had to come before the destruction of the second temple. If it wasn't Jesus, who was it? Because there's no other movement at that point other than Christianity. So that's same kind of stuff on that. So when you say those have to do with Israel or not, and Israel doesn't really exist, it's not real Israel because we're them. Problem is the prophecies that Israel would come back. And there are two prophecies about Israel coming back to their land, specifically on the date of 1948. And then there's another prophecy about them taking back the Temple Mount in 1967. So if Israel came back in 1948, reestablished their nation, and then in 67 took the Temple Mount, you'd think they would take it all right then and there, but for some reason they don't. And history shows that's exactly what happened. You can't say that those aren't the real Jews or that they're, we're the real Jews or whatever. I can see you doing that until 1948. But when the prophecies are literally fulfilled with a date, you can't get around that. I mean, you can try to say, well, it's a coincidence because it's only two prophecies. But like in our book, Ancient Prophecies Revealed, we list over 50 prophecies that have been fulfilled since 1948. I mean, how many do you have to know, apparently I'm wrong and apparently this is a real thing? Because you can't have 50 coincidences in that sense. So anyway, so yeah, there's a division. We do have to be careful not to fall into the apostasy idea. So we've got to be careful if someone is a replacement theology person to say, I disagree, there's too much evidence the other way, have a nice day. We don't argue. We don't try to hit them, kill them, or anything like that. Don't fall into this hostility thing. Another example of that is I'm pre-trib. There are other people that are post-trib. And my attitude is like, I think they're wrong. They're good Christians, but I just think they're wrong on that point. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm not, but I'm going to go on my way and I'm going to teach what I believe. But you'll notice that some of the post-trib people are extremely hostile, get mad, shout, yell, scream on their YouTube videos and stuff like that. It's not the apostasy, but it's drifting that direction. You don't allow yourself to attack someone else like that. Now, if you caught me getting drunk, having an affair, murdering someone, moral issues, that's different. You excommunicate me, you make that clear. But you don't divide the body of Christ for a non-moral issue. That in itself is a moral issue, and that would be sinful. So we got to be real careful of that. But yeah, that division is happening, and I think it's going to continue. Think about this for a minute. This is interesting. The Lord sends the evil people division amongst themselves. I think Satan tries that same tactic in the church. I mean, I've had friends say Baptists and Calvinists, they have a different gospel, so they're going to die and go to hell. I don't think that. And I'm sure there's probably people on their side, maybe, that say if I'm not a Calvinist, I got a different gospel, I'm going to die and go to hell, that kind of thing. The Lord did whatever it is he did to create salvation. And if you believe, you're a believer. It's that simple. You try, you fail, you fall into sin occasionally, but you're a believer. If you walk in sin, you will be chastised. It says in Hebrews chapter 12 or 13. And so those are things to think about. And we all make mistakes, and we all occasionally choose to sin or allow ourselves to fall into sin. And we're not all going to die and go to hell. He loves us enough that he died for us. He's not going to allow some little thing like that. He's going to discipline us first anyway. Okay, question. Hi, Ken. Thank you for this ministry. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ abound in you and your family all your days. Thank you very much. Would you consider allowing people to do video call in for questions? That might be something we can do. I use Restream to do this, so put the graphics with it and have the video stuff over here. I mean, the charts and stuff over here that we're studying, and then I'm over here. We could do that. I could bring other people on. I think I can do up to 10 at a time, or 8 or something like that. I have had Josh Peck on the show, or on this program. I think he's the only one that I've done that with, but we were talking about Enoch's calendar at the time. So yeah, that is a possibility. We'll see, if we can do something like that. It's a good idea, especially if you have a question and you want to show a chart or an old scroll or something like that, and that I don't have. So there's some benefits for that. Question: do you think when the Pharisees said, too many books have driven Paul mad, they were referring to his study with the Essenes? I'd never thought of that before. That's possible. If I remember correctly, the one that I'm thinking of is, was it Festus? One of the guys, no, Agrippa. Listened to him talk about this guy raising from the dead and said, your much study has made you mad, which would be insane or something. So I don't know necessarily, but it's a possibility, because he's talking the resurrection, which he would have got from just when Jesus showed himself to him in Damascus, Syria. But I think the other stuff definitely applies to this, especially with the way that it's structured. And there's no Dead Sea Scroll really that goes against Christian doctrine. And most of them, the theology parts, support the doctrine very well. So that's a really good point. So, okay, let me get back to here. Okay, well, that's our questions for tonight. We have our donate button up here. I wouldn't want to share remind you a few things. We have our Bible Facts manuscript channel. That's our second channel. This is our teaching channel. The other channel, and it should be listed down below, is just for the manuscripts. So right now we're finishing up Enoch, and we've got like 3rd Corinthians, Gad the Seer, Barnabas, I think, and something else. Eventually we want to have most of the old scrolls up there. It's just the text, and you get to listen to it. No commentary. So you can just listen to it. And then over here is the teaching. We'll be doing commentary on it and stuff. So want to make sure you knew that. We also have a network, which is private. It's not with Facebook or anything like that, so it's not going to be censored. And we get to talk about herbal medicine, prophecy, and other stuff without fear of censorship. So I want to let those two know. And then if you wanted to support our ministry, this is a link to Give, Send, Go, which is a Christian company. And so you can support us that way. So anyway, wanted to let you know, guys, know that stuff. Again, we'll probably take 2 more weeks to finish up the Ezra Apocalypse. And then we can start looking at some other scrolls that I think you're going to find very, very interesting. So I'll go ahead and let you go, and we will be back.